Well, hello, Faith family, and thank you for joining us for this Monday edition of the Daily Connection. Of course, it's the time when we get together in the Word. More importantly, the Word gets into us. So we're still in our series, Irrefutable, and we're talking about how our King, that being Jesus, His kingdom and His rule is forever. It lasts forever. Now, when we talk about Jesus as King, that was something that the New Testament, the first century crowd, the Jewish crowd, struggled with mightily. In fact, if you go all the way back to his birth, for instance, we know that it was 2 years after his birth, roughly in that time frame, that Magi came. They're the ones who recognized him to be a king. These pagan astrologers, probably, that dabbled more outside of the realm of anything related to God, and yet they came expecting to find the king. And yet that brought concern to Herod initially, and then later on to the Jewish religious leaders, because everything that Jesus represented was in contrast to everything that they were. And so now we're getting to the end of his ministry. We're in John chapter 18. We've come through the garden. We've heard the high priestly prayer. Now Jesus has been brought, after facing the Sanhedrin, he's been brought before Pilate himself. And Pilate, after listening to the Jewish leaders in verse 33, he says this. He goes back into the headquarters. He summoned Jesus and he said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, the way that reads in the English is a little misleading because the word "you" there is emphatic. So really it's almost like he says, "You? You're the king of the Jews?" So he's saying it with a bit of shock in his voice. And we know that was an important question that he asked because all four gospel writers include that question. Now, the reason why he asked that question is made clear in Luke's gospel, chapter 23. There we're told in verse 1 following, "Then their whole assembly rose up and brought him," that being the Sanhedrin, "brought him before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this man misleading our nation, opposing payment of taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king.'" So here we see the Jewish leaders were trying to kind of ag it on, intensify the possibility that their accusation was believable. Something else that kind of helped influence that also was that it's close to Passover. We're right bumping up against Passover, and it was always expected that a Messiah would appear, and frankly, there had been a few rogue Messiahs pop up about the same timeline in terms of the calendar year for Passover. And so as far as Pilate's concerned, he's almost already alert, if you will, expecting someone to show up to incite violence, maybe even lead an insurrection. And that's basically what these religious leaders are accusing Jesus. They're saying he's an insurrectionist. He's trying to lead our people, first of all, to defy the law of Caesar and not pay taxes to Caesar. That's the accusation they're making. But the bigger picture is they're trying to set him up as one who opposes Caesar, which means he's opposing Pilate, he opposes Roman rule, and he poses a threat. And so when they bring him to Pilate and they make these accusations, Pilate just kind of gives Jesus a look over, and he's like, You're the king of the Jews?" Because he didn't look like a king. There was nothing impressive about Jesus. Remember, he wore peasant clothing. He could have blended in any crowd. He didn't have a big following as far as, a big party and trumpet sounding, all those things. Although on Palm Sunday, he definitely had a celebration. But any other time, it was just him, his followers. Nothing impressive about that. There was no military prowess about Jesus in terms of, he didn't carry a sword. There was no weaponry with those who followed him. Nothing about Jesus. And also, let's not forget, he's coming out of Gethsemane, so there may even still be stains of blood on his clothes where as he was praying, it was so intense that the capillaries began to burst and he's sweating blood. So there's nothing about him in his visual appearance that would be impressive to Pilate. And so he looks and he says, You're the king of the Jews? Sadly, there are many today who read the gospel account of Jesus and they look over the history of his life from his birth through his ministry to his death. Everything about Jesus, and it causes them to question that, could this truly be a king? But the fact is, if we go back in history and we go back to the prophecies, we realize that everything about his life matches the promise that God made in terms of his Messiah. most especially in his first coming. Now, we know from Scripture also that when Jesus returns, when the Christ comes the second time, there'll be no mistaking that he is indeed the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. There'll be no mistaking that he alone is worthy of all worship and praise. And we're told in Scripture that there is a day coming when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Had they understood their Scriptures properly and had their hearts not been so sinful, then they would have embraced him, knowing that he didn't come to fight their earthly enemy. He came to defeat the enemy of the soul, that being sin and sin's power, death. And they would have embraced and worshiped him. Well, that reminds us that just because the religious leaders rejected him, just because the Jews rejected him, just because Pilate and the Romans rejected him, that doesn't mean that he's not the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is the King, and his reign is forever. As God promised to David, God fulfilled it in the Christ, and one day we will see him as he is in his full, unveiled glory. But because he is the King, that means that he deserves our complete and unquestioned loyalty and service. How do we demonstrate that Jesus is King? Simple. We obey him. We submit to his authority. We surrender to his rulership over our life, and we follow him obediently. As we think about the brand new year starting, because, I hate to say it, we're already post-Christmas, but that doesn't mean the wonder of Christmas leaves us. But as we think about 2022, let's think about it in terms of the rule and reign of Jesus in our heart. If he is indeed the King of Kings, and we believe he is, then let's live in such a way that reflects that. It reflects his glory. It reflects his position of authority in and over our life. And because he's King, he has the authority to send us out every day in mission for his objective, which is the commission. So as always, I encourage you, as we continue to live in the shadow, we're living right there in the shadow of Christmas. As you go out today, wherever you're headed, whatever God is sending you to do, we know he's doing that what? He is sending you to live sent.